Alright guys, another day, another strength. Got a real whopper of a video for you guys today, so buckle up and get ready, because we're going to talk about injuries. This is the injury video. Here we go, right? So let's start off by defining what is an injury, and what is an actual injury and what is a tweak or inflammation, because there's two different things, right? So an injury, I would define as like actual structural damage to your body. So it could be a muscle tear, a tendon tear, a bone break, something really bad that requires like serious rehab and or surgery. Now this is very uncommon in the gym. It can happen outside the gym. It can even happen in the gym, but it's just not very common. But if that happens, then it's a little bit more in depth. But what's a lot more common is number two here, the inflammation or tweaks, right? So this is just something that's uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable. Like it can almost feel like a tear or a rupture at times. But it's generally not that big of an issue. It's, acute. It's not going to stick around, and then it can be worked around pretty easily, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit, right? So here are the steps here. What happens if you actually do tweak something or experience inflammation, right? Number one, don't go to the doctor, okay? This sounds crazy, but if you go to the doctor, they're just going to tell you to sit around and not do anything. And I'll talk about why that's a really bad idea in a moment. But like I said, if it's a tweak or inflammation, right? There's nothing seriously wrong with you. Right? If you have like a muscle tear or tendon tear, obviously there's something wrong with you. You should go to the doctor. But we're talking about inflammation or tweaks here. If that's the case, don't go to the doctor because they're going to tell you to not do anything so that they can cover themselves. It's a liability thing, right? They're not actually going to give you like important info. So if you have access to a specialist, you could try that. The thing with specialists is that it can be kind of hit or miss. And I'm going to summarize like basically the entire video right here. But the TLDR of this is that rehab is generally pretty simple, right? You figure out what's bothering you, whether it's a muscle, tendon, a joint, whatever. Figure out the function of that muscle, tendon, or joint, and then you just have to load that and get it stronger over time with the movement that does not significantly bother that area, right? That's really all there is to it. Very, very simple. So if you do hire a PT or an orthopedist or something like that, ask questions. You can ask them like seemingly stupid, obvious questions, right? Because they should be able to answer them in a way that makes sense to you if they're good at their job. Whether it's an orthopedist, a PT, or even just a starting strength coach like myself, right? We can help with that sort of stuff. But yeah, so don't go to the doctor unless it's a serious injury, right? Then you have bigger problems. And then the biggest, most important one, do not skip the gym, right? Do not just sit around because like I just said, most important thing is that you have to strengthen the area. So what are you strengthening by sitting around? Nothing, right? So you have to go in the gym, you got to strengthen stuff. If you don't, here's what's going to happen. Let's say you have like a little tweak that flares up when you squat 225, right? Let's say you're like a 35-year-old guy. Younger guys generally tend to not appreciate this very much. The older guys know what I'm talking about. But you squat 225, it hurts. So you stop, you take time off, take a month off or whatever. Then you come back, work up to 225. Every time you get there, it hurts. So you just, whenever you get there, you back off, you stop squatting. And then eventually you turn 45, then you go in, you start working back up. Now all of a sudden at 200, it starts to hurt, it starts to flare up. So then you do the same cycle, back off, you turn 55 and now 185 hurts. And then eventually you're 75 and now all of a sudden it's not even a loaded barbell that hurts you. You're getting up off the couch, off the toilet, and now, your back's hurting you. And then shortly after that, you're gonna sit around even more, you're gonna move less, wither away faster, and then you're gonna circle the drain and die. It's gonna be miserable, right? And so it sounds very morbid, but this happens, and it's very unfortunate. So you guys are getting the dad talk right now, all right? This is very serious. You gotta take care of yourself. This is just as preventable as like heart disease, diabetes, chronic diseases, right? So don't skip the gym. Keep yourself strong. Keep yourself in good shape. I'm gonna get into if something does hurt, what you should do about it in a second. But if you train, your ailment is going to heal faster because you're gonna get blood flow to the area, which is gonna help it feel better acutely and long-term as well. It's going to accelerate the healing process. And then if you don't, it's going to take twice as long because you're not moving around, so everything's just sitting there and not feeling very good. And then also you're not strengthening the area. So anyways, spoiler alert, you're not going to hurt yourself further if you go about things intelligently, right? So if you, tweak your back deadlifting 405, you're not going to go back in and then attempt to deadlift 410 after you tweak your back, right? That'd be dumb. So me personally, I have a long history with back tweaks specifically. I feel like everyone has like a weak area or a problem area that gets, flares up and tweaks. So thankfully I've never broken a bone, never torn a muscle or anything like that. But I have tweaked my back a number of times and it's been, pretty bad at times. But about 5 years ago, 2019, I was deadlifting. I was very new to lifting at this time. I tweaked my back on a deadlift, and then I took like months off the gym, and the whole time I was like, I had sciatica. It was, there was pain. There was like, it was miserable. This was like the worst pain I've ever had. Not as far as like the actual pain, but as far as like the duration of time that it went on for. Like I've never felt like an old person, right? Long story short, I learned how to lift, learned how to coach. Now, I tweak my back a few times a year, I would say. And whenever it happens, it's better within like 2 days because I know what to do about it, right? Sometime last summer, I had one where I tweaked my back, run-of-the-mill stuff, like it's happened before. The next day, I was like limping in the morning. It was so bad. It was miserable. But I still, moved around as much as I could. I got in some rack pulls, and then it was like amazing after the rack pulls. Like it felt great. Wasn't hurting at all. I was racking on like 135, right? And I tweaked my back with like a 3-something deadlift, right? So it was, super, super lightweight, but that kept the stress off of it. But that's my point, is like you have to move around. So I think I got that across. So I can move on, all right? This is how you actually train when you have a tweak. So let's talk about the pain scale first, because this is imperative. A lot of people get this stuff wrong, right? So 1 to 10 is the pain scale. If it's a 1 or 2, that means that the pain is noticeable, but nothing necessarily out of the ordinary, right? Especially if you're 30 plus. Younger guys aren't going to relate to this as well, but as the old guys at the gym will say, they'll say, "Hey, Mike, it's talking to me today. My shoulder is talking to me a little bit. Like it's noticeable, but it's not really like cause for concern. Like if it gets worse during the workout, you're going to say something, but otherwise you're just going to go about your business, right? It is what it is. A 3 to 4, and now you're starting to have like second thoughts, and you're thinking about not pushing it further. You're like, I don't know about going to this next set. It's starting to kind of get a little louder here, right? A 5 to 6 is where you're calling it, you're cutting it off, like you're not going to keep doing whatever's hurting it. And this is when like, if you don't have experience with this, you're like, I'm going to go to the doctor. This is when it's like, you have either a full-on tweak or some serious inflammation at this point. A 7 to 8 out of 10, this is like an actual muscle tear, tendon rupture, bone break, which again, I've never had one, but this is what I would imagine it would be. This would be like, something undoubtedly is wrong is the criteria, and you're going to the hospital if this happens. This could be like, like a heart attack or like a stroke. Something like very serious where there's like no doubt in your mind, like something's wrong, I need to go to the hospital right now. And then 9 out of 10 is you're passing out or you're like on the verge of death. You could even say like a 10 out of 10 is like you're dying, right? But yeah, that's the pain scale. So a lot of the time people will come in and they have something that's like a 1 or 2 because they'll like walk in the gym totally normal and they're like, hey, my knee's like bugging me, and I'm like, what's the pain? And they're like, it's like a 7.5 out of 10. And I'm like, okay, so it's not. But yeah, that's the pain scale, right? So when you're training around a tweak, you want to keep the pain to a 3 to 4 out of 10 or less. So that's where it's like, you might be having like second thoughts, and that's probably what it's going to feel like after you've tweaked it already, right? But you don't want to get any worse than that. If it does, then you're going to make a change, which we'll talk about in a second. You're going to warm up very slowly, right? You can use like the Echo bike. We have the Rogue Echo bike at our gym. Some kind of like stationary bike works great. Or just do like empty bar movement or just body weight movement, So after warming up, if the pain stays the same or most likely gets better, then continue warming up, right? So now if you go into a movement pattern, so like let's say you have like a lower back tweak and you're gonna start squatting first, and then as you're warming up your squats, if things start to get worse, then make one of these following changes, aka stop doing the thing that's hurting you, but don't just like stop entirely and go home. That's dumb, right? So let's talk about the steps that you can take to alter the movement in order to reduce the pain, right? So I would place the things in this order, right? With the and the level of caution depends on the severity of the pain and the history of the injury and the pain. So if this is something that like you have a long history with, you have some background with it, you can err more on the side of caution. If it's your first time tweaking something and it's not that bad, then you can start off just normally. So like I said, if you're warming up and the pain is either getting better or going away, then just do the normal movement, right? You can make smaller jumps for your warm-ups, but like plan for your normal work set and just plan to do that, right? So that's like step 0 is like don't change anything if everything's fine, right? So then after that, number 1 would be adjust the tempo of the lift. So for example, if you have like a back tweak and you're squatting, just do a tempo squat. Go nice and slow. No sudden like bounces in the hole or anything like that. Which brings me to number 2, which is pausing, right? So those two go together very well. Tempo, pausing, basically just control the movement. If it's a deadlift, you can put it down slowly. Just don't have like, if it's a press, lower it slowly. Don't just like drop the bar on your shoulders, that sort of thing, right? So that's going to take care of most tweaks, right? If it's more severe than that, number 3 is you can change the angle of the movement somehow. So for example, if you're bench pressing and it's bothering you, you can do an incline bench instead. That might not bother it. You can do an overhead press. If you are squatting, low bar squatting, right, and it's bothering you, you can do a high bar squat or like a safety bar squat, and then vice versa. And then number 4 is if all those things don't work, then you can change the movement entirely for an inverse movement, which I'll give some examples in a moment, right? But yeah, and then this one should go without saying. It's not really a step, but like make sure that you actually start light. So like I said, if you tweak your back, deadlifting 405, start with like, start with the bike, then do like body weight, then do empty bar squats, then do like 95 instead of 135, then go to 135, right? Warm slowly. Don't just go right into like 315 and, mess up your back again, right? So let's talk about the most common injuries and then the things that work most commonly to cure those ailments, right? So in general, as far as the work sets, if it's bad enough that you have to like modify the movement, basically anything beyond step 0, which is like do the same thing, I'm generally gonna have people do sets of 3. And the reason for that is because it's less chances to mess up, because usually these tweaks happen from messing something up in the movement, or it happened with something outside the gym and then messing something up during the movement is going to exacerbate it. So you can control sets of 3 a lot better, less chances to screw up. And then also, I know online people say that with tendon and like joint stuff that you want to do very, very high reps. But the thing is like they don't get a lot of blood flow, so doing that is just going to kind of like bug them. It's going to introduce more opportunities to mess the movement up. And I just find anecdotally that like using sets of 3, even with like tendon and joint stuff, it works really great and it makes that stuff go away. So anyways, I'll work from the top of the body going down, most common things I see. So the neck, usually like a neck or like a trap tweak. This usually happens with the overhead press, and it's usually something to do with the head like flying around or like the eyes not being locked in one spot. It's people like, following the bar and looking like this on the wave and they lose their balance or something like that. Or it could also be by lowering the bar like in an unwieldy fashion, like dropping it in front of them and like losing balance, or they try to like bring the bar down and like aim for the rack as they bring it down. So you can tweak your neck doing that. And if you do, then generally strict press works pretty great with a tempo eccentric. So bring it down nice and slowly like that, right? Tempo deadlifts work great. So normal on the way up, and then you just go kind of slow on the way down. And then like in extreme cases, if it's something that's recurring, it happens a lot, direct neck training actually kind of works pretty well, I found. And if you do it intelligently again, so talk to your coach about that, but like you start very, very light, start with that weight usually, and you just kind of do some like neck strengthening stuff, that'll work. But yeah, moving on to the shoulder, this is usually a bench press thing, very rarely a shoulder press. Like overhead press, if you're doing it properly, pretty much never you have shoulder issues. In fact, I will say step 1, if you have a shoulder issue caused by the bench, make sure that you're actually overhead pressing, because that's going to help it go away most of the time. But yeah, close grip bench is usually my first go-to here. I'll modify the grip, and then as well as the tempo and the pausing like I said before. And then as far as changing the angle, if there's still pain there, I might try an incline bench, which tends to work pretty well. In the bench press, you have a big moment arm from where the bar touches to where the shoulder is. In the incline bench, you're touching higher up, so there's a shorter moment arm there. So although you might be putting more stress like on the delt, for example, you're actually reducing the moment arm on the shoulder, which, in my experience, makes people's shoulders feel a lot better. I have a lot of old guys that have shoulder issues and they can incline bench just fine, right? But they can't flat bench because it bothers their shoulder. And usually like you shouldn't have shoulder issues unless you're like 60 plus. That's just my experience personally. Otherwise you've probably done some gnarly stuff in your day. But yeah, if that also fails, you can try the inverse movement pattern. So for example, if you're like pressing overhead and your shoulder's bugging you, you can do curls. And like you can do cheek curls to do them heavy if you want to, so it's more similar. But that works. You can do lat pull downs and chin ups, and you can adjust the angle of that too. And then you can do like barbell rows. So you're still gonna work a lot of the same musculature antagonistically. But yeah, that works pretty well. As far as the elbow goes, if it's on the inside, this is the golfer's elbow. It's generally an issue with your squat grip. Usually you're holding the bar in your hands and not on your shoulders. It's usually the low bar squat, also less common with high bar. But low bar squat, you wanna make sure you have a nice narrow grip, as close as you can get it. It should be pretty uncomfortable without the bar sliding around, right? And then you want to keep your chest puffed out and your shoulders squeezed together so that the bar is going to sit there in that spot and not in your hands and on your wrists, because then it's going to transfer force down into your elbow and bother it like this. So I've had this in the past when I was not squatting properly, and it gets like so bad I felt like I couldn't even pick up a cup of water, and then it'll go away within like a half hour and just like be totally gone. But tempo lat pull downs tend to work pretty well. So like I said, sets of 3, go really slow. You can pause at your chest if you want to, but just get blood flow into there with those heavy sets there. If you can do chins, if you're strong enough for that, you can do sets of 3 chins as well instead, rather. But yeah, if it's on the outside of the elbow, so out here now, it's usually also a squat grip thing, but sometimes that can arise from the press 2.0 if you're like bouncing all crazy, or even in the strict press if you're bringing the bar down too hard and like jamming your elbows at the bottom. What you can do is you can strict press with a tempo eccentric, and then my favorite thing actually is tempo bench. This tends to work great. Same thing, sets of 3. You just go really slow on the way down, and then you press up, and that tends to make the outside of the elbow feel a little bit better. And that's usually where it's going to become an issue too. Usually with both types of elbow tendonitis, it's not an issue during the squat, which is what's actually causing it. It's usually an issue during your presses and your benches. So that's how you work around it. The lower back. This is usually caused by incorrect pulling and squatting mechanics, and it's usually the SI joint, so like right down the tailbone down there. Usually it's like someone, pulling with the bar in front of midfoot, or pulling with their back inflection, or it could be squatting and they're trying to like do a low bar squat with high bar mechanics, and they're like raising their chest on the way up. That can cause issues. But yeah, the antidote to that is tempo deadlifts, so slow on the way down, right? Don't just like drop to the floor. You can do rack pulls, those are great. Same thing, tempo on the way down. Tempo and pause squats are great. And if you're gonna squat, I recommend wearing a belt. If you normally wear a belt while you're deadlifting, wear a belt. If you don't wear a belt, then don't wear a belt. But yeah, that's the low back. Pretty straightforward. Hip pain, this is less common, but I will amend it a little bit, talk about like hamstring pain, because people tweak their hamstrings, usually outside the gym, but you can, rehab it in the gym. I usually stick with tempo paused squats, low bar squat preferably, because even though it involves the hamstring, it's not to that large of a degree compared to like a Romanian deadlift or something. So I'd start with that just to make sure it doesn't hurt when you're doing that, like kind of assess the severity of it. Tempo pause squat, and then over time you want to load up the RDL movement pattern slowly. So a lot of people start with just like body weight and have them do that. I'll have them do like sets of 8 to 12, maybe like 2 sets, right? And then over time I'll add weight to those slowly. 2 sets of 8 to 12, and then like very slow. So like body weight, and then like maybe like 2.5 pound plate, 5 pound plate, depending on the severity of the tweak, right? If it's like you think it's a tear, which I have a guy right now that I'm working with that, he's had hamstring like tear issues in the past, so that's what we're doing to amend that. And also his did not happen in the gym, so there you go. It's usually not going to. The adductor, the inner thigh. This is usually from the low bar squat. This one's very simple. The adductor, what it does is when you point your knees out during a squat, they will stretch, and that can cause pain. So all you do is you turn your toes forward and don't send your knees out. So it's going to alter the mechanics of your squat a bit and make you feel kind of weird, but it's going to feel a lot better than having your adductor hurt. And then if you have knee issues, that's usually due to high bar squatting or squatting with poor mechanics, or like it can also be like any like very knees forward squat without pauses, like where you're kind of doing a hard bounce, like a Clarence Kennedy style squat. If you're not Clarence Kennedy, that can cause knee issues. But what you want to do is either, if you're still doing that same style of squat, you can just use like tempo, pause, same thing there, right? Preferably you can low bar squat, because then you don't need to use tempo or pause. Like you can usually just, we have old people with knee issues that like can low bar squat day one with no issues, right? There's just not as much force on the knee when you're doing that. And if it's really bad, then you can do, like if it's patellar tendonitis, for example, it's like an ongoing thing. You can do box squats where you reach way far back and kind of get off balance a little bit, where you try to bend your knee as little as possible. And that works very well for that. But yeah, that's really it for the whole video. Just to reiterate, the core of it is all you're trying to do is strengthen the affected muscle, joint, tendon, whatever, with incrementally loadable movements over time, right? So just pick something that doesn't hurt it more than like a 3 or 4 out of 10, like I said, and then it doesn't get worse, and then you can load that area over time and get stronger. And that's gonna help make that injury go away and then keep it away and keep you healthy. So if you guys enjoyed the video, or if you have any questions, say something in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, goodbye.